I will now discuss a little bit on the diminished scale. The diminished scale comes in two forms. Either it's whole step, half step, or half step, whole step. The well, in the jazz language, sometimes it's referred to as, in the case of the whole step, half step, as a 2+1 diminished scale, and the half step as a 1+2. Two meaning two semitones or a whole tone, and one is a semitone or a half step. So two means two half steps making a whole step, and one is a half step. So 2+1 or 1+2. And unlike other scales like the major scales and the harmonic minor, there are no modes really in a diminished scale. It's really an inversion, an interval inversion, so that when you move from, say, C diminished, C, D, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, A, and B, and then you have the upper C, right? So once you get to B, the scale ends, right? And then now, to invert it, you can start the scale now from B upwards. So that's an inversion. It's a symmetrical scale because the intervals of tone, semitone, right, tone, semitone, and so on. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So it's very symmetrical. And it's a very useful scale in that it contains a lot of the chord qualities that are used in jazz. Dominant sevenths, major sevenths with minor major sevenths, dominant seven flat nine, and within every diminished scale will reside 4 major triads and 4 minor triads. So that's useful to know. And what you have to also take note is that every degree or every note in a diminished scale is like a fresh root. So that one can say that C diminished is the same as D diminished, is the same as E flat diminished, same as F diminished, G flat, A, B. We can say that. We can use that as a guide to understanding the architecture of this diminished scale. On the first degree of the 2+1, which is the whole half step diminished scale, the chord quality is a diminished seventh, full diminished. On the second degree, it's a dominant seventh with a flat 9. The third degree is another diminished seventh. So on chord tones or scale tones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. Okay, 1, 3, 5, and 7. You're going to get these diminished seventh chords. Okay, and on the second, fourth, 6 and 8 degrees, you're going to get dominant 7 with a flat 9. And therefore, if we are confronted with any of those dominant 7 flat 9, whether the dominant 7 flat 9 is functioning as a standalone or static dominant in a vamp, or even in a functional position where it's a 5 chord, so in a 2-5 situation, you have a dominant 7 flat 9, and usually dominant 7 flat 9s are often found in minor 2/5s, where the dominant chord is not a pure dominant as is the case of a major scale, but rather is an altered dominant, right? Because the 2 chord in a minor key, which is called the supertonic, would always be a minor 7 flat 5 chord as opposed to a pure minor 7th compared to the major counterpart. So when you play a minor 7 flat 5 as a 2 chord, you need to have a dominant chord that will be symbiotically connected to that chord, as it were. In other words, the flat 5 of the 2 chord, right, is equal to the flat 9 of the 5 chord. So flat 5 moves into flat 9. It's like a guide tone, like 3 into 7. Okay? And so because of the fact that you have those 4 dominant 7 flat 9 chords residing in that diminished scale, the 2 plus 1, you have a lot of flexibility, right? And you have to, when you harmonize, let's say, the tonic chord of the diminished scale, let's say C diminished whole half separate, you find that the chord construction will be C, E flat, G flat, and B double flat. Now, in theory, we would say B double flat, but really, I prefer to say B double flat. I like to read it as a sixth, a major 6. Okay, because to explain the double flat aspect of it, it takes too much energy. So, right, and the dominant 7th with the flat, for the flat 9, will be D, F, right, A flat, okay, and B. Therefore, you don't have to play the scale in a linear form, because you're going to sound very predictable. You will sound figured. You will sound as though you're playing an etude or an exercise. So the trick here, you have to use your ear and try to camouflage that diminish repetitious song in your playing. So what you can do to avoid that pitfall is to use the triads in there, the 4 major triads, the 4 minor triads, in an arpeggio form. So if I have to play, let's say I have to play a C diminished, okay, the four major and minor triads in that diminished scale will be D major, F major, A flat major, and B major. And similarly, minor chords with bearing the same roots: D minor, F minor, A flat minor, and B minor. So you can render that scale in the form of triadic movements or arpeggios, okay, and still get the feel of the diminished scale without sounding like a repetitious etude or exercise. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you don't play the scale up and down to practice the scales, and it's not an easy scale to play, especially on the guitar. I mean, on other instruments, it's just as difficult. But many players just understand the construction of the scale without necessarily fully understanding the application of the scale. Okay? And as we discussed in I think in self-test number 3, we talked about the component pentatonic scales that reside inside of a diminished scale. Well, you have one component, set of pentatonic, one component on the notes D, F, A flat, and B. And on each of those constituent notes of the scale, you apply a formula 1, flat 9, 3, 5, and 6. As an example, let's take D. It will be D, E flat, G flat, A, and B. That's one pentatonic. There's 4 of them. Then the next one will be F, G flat, A, C, and D. The third one will be A flat, A, C, E flat, and F. And the fourth one will be B, C, D sharp, G flat, and A flat. That is one group of component pentatonics based on that formula of 1 flat 9, 3, 5, and 6. There are other component pentatonics based on a different formula, and that formula is 1 sharp 9, 3, 5, and flat 7. So in that case now, we're going to have some component pentatonics. Let's say on the first one being B, D, E flat, G flat, and A. D, F, G flat, A, and C. F, A flat, A, C, and E flat. And A flat, B, C, D sharp, and G flat. So again, this is another opportunity. You don't have to play the scale. You can play any one of those component pentatonics in arpeggio forms, and as a result, you have less numbers to work with. You know, you're playing on a stage. You're doing an improvised line. You don't have to think this grand scale and what have you. You can just get a few component pentatonics out of that scale in your head, and there's so many permutations for each one of them. Every 4-note grouping or subset or tetrachord will have 24 permutations. So just on one pentatonic, a component pentatonic, you have 24 permutations. You know, they call it factorial 4. So that's about the long and short of my discussion today on the diminished. There's much more which I'll have to address in other videos, because as I mentioned before, that the subject of symmetrical scales, diminished in particular, it is as long as it is wide. You know, it's a scale in that musical universe that's available to the improviser, but you have to understand it very thoroughly to be able to make sense out of it. So work on that, and we shall continue at another point in time. Thank you.